All right, welcome to class, everyone. So by now, you have a couple of sources, and you're working to narrow down your topics. How did that go? Do we find some sources? Do we feel more narrowed, more direction? Okay, so the very next stage in this is to narrow this down even more so that you can organize your information that makes sense to your listeners. So be an audience centered. Now this is also good in everyday communication so that we organize how we present information to anybody we're trying to communicate an effective message to. So starting off, we have narrowed down to something within these categories. So that was a stage one. Then you looked up some more information to support whatever category you are going in. Next, we're going to organize this information in what's called an organizational pattern. So this is just a continuation of chapter 11. There are several different organizational patterns to choose from. You can mix and match these. However, some of these, because they merge both of those chapters together for the informative and the persuasive chapters, so some of these are not going to be relevant for us in this first presentation, but we'll go over the ones that are going to be most relevant for you. So think about your topics and how this could fit into your topic. The first organizational pattern is what's called a time sequence or chronological. That means that we move only one way in time when we're explaining something. So it's a time sequence, like a history class. We start at a punctuated point, we move forward in time, and we end at a punctuated point. And we don't jump around with the dates. So that is one of the many examples of something that's time sequence. It goes in some type of progress, and it doesn't really jump around. So, of course, history, anything, if you want to describe something like an issue that's happened and there was certain time sequence that developed into this, then that's one way to use chronological. Anything when we're talking about some type of a life process, getting a cold.
Oh, that
There's
sucks.
a process. Okay, when we first get a cold, anybody have a cold in here now? No?
Yes, sir.
Okay, knock on whatever this is. Okay, so, when we first start to have the symptoms of a cold, what happens?
We get like an itchy throat.
Yeah, you lie to yourself. It's just allergies. We all go through this. And then get the really bad sore throat and the headache. So it goes through this process. And no matter what we do, and I don't care how many articles we read on Pinterest, there is no way to get out of all the stages of a cold. No matter what, it's 7 to 10 days, sometimes 14, depending on the virus you have.
Yeah, really be like that.
Yeah, just don't get sick in the first place.
That's how you avoid that.
So this time, if we were to describe this cold, it would be in this time sequence. So if we were to look back at some of these categories, what are your categories? Which categories would fit into this time sequence?
Events and activities.
Good. Okay. Anybody doing an event or an activity? Okay. So you saw that right away. You identified it. That's what I want to see. Anybody else see how any of these categories can fit into this? Let me feed into this a little bit more. Okay. College education or education in general. You start off with classes that are a certain level. And then as you go on, you build on those concepts and they get harder and harder because that's how you build on a college education. It's a
Process and concept.
Perfect.
Anybody see that now within their outlines, within their presentations? So we're seeing a few more. Usually I get a few people that see this. Okay, so chronological or time sequence. You can only go two ways. Okay, that's forward or backward in time. That's it. So we're taking two endpoints and we're demonstrating this. Process, a concept, an event, those things work for chronological. So you can go ahead and consider if that will work for maybe your entire outline or maybe just a part of your outline. And we'll kind of demonstrate where that might fall in with these. The next one is called spatial. And spatial is just a fancy way of saying that you're describing something as it occurs in space. So here we have this room. So if I were to describe everything about each of you in this direction, I'm only going to go in one direction. So it's a little bit different than that time sequence, but it has a similarity in that the moment you start describing something in one direction, you continue in that same direction. So you don't bounce around. Or I could go this way. Or if I'm describing a building, a monument, I may go from bottom to top or top to bottom. Okay, those firefighters, they'll be looking at a building and they need this. Anybody tinker around with mechanical stuff just for fun? Hobbies? Okay, an exploded view of that thing uses spatial with the legends that say A, B, C, look here. Okay, they're using spatial maps. Okay, so if you're describing something, a place that we're going to have a hard time knowing where it's at because we don't have experience in that area, spatial may be a good way to bring that up. Parts in the brain. Okay, you can use these together sometimes, and they can enhance a really nice organizational pattern. So the first thing is this, and you go here. Okay, the next thing when you turn and you look at this is this. And our third step is this, like when you're describing to a friend how to get to your house from the college. Okay, now I've tested
Bro, I've
both
been
of my
holding on to
classes
this
on
for
this.
8 minutes, that's why.
And so far we're 1 and 2 in getting this right. But our solar system is described spatially. Starting from the sun, let's list our planets.
I think a better question would be, do we know all of our planets?
Yeah.
You know what, one of my
What's that
classes
first one?
We missed one, I didn't realize
Yeah,
it until my second
Mercury,
class.
Venus,
But you're my
Earth,
third
Mars.
class, come on, I have faith in you.
Jupiter,
So we have the sun.
Saturn,
Oh,
Neptune, Uranus. Wait, you want me to go through all of them?
Okay, what's the first planet, everybody?
Mercury,
Okay, the next planet.
Venus,
Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. But we don't count Pluto anymore.
Do we?
I thought they did. I thought they
Oh,
came
did
back
they bring
with-
it back?
It's not
It was a
considered
dwarf planet.
Yeah,
About planet
That's
X.
discriminating if you ask me.
I was gonna
Oh,
say,
no, I
last
fuck
time
with Pluto.
Pluto's smaller than our
a
moon.
dwarf planet.
It was when I
Good to
first
know.
learned.
I like that.
Hey,
Fun
Jack.
fact.
bro. I need to go Pluto real quick.
Pluto is still not considered a planet.
Oh, this kid just walked in.
Icy dwarf planet.
What up,
I
new
just
kid?
didn't give a persuasive presentation on this, on why it should be considered a planet. It's very
I don't know what it is.
persuasive. Okay, so anyway, this is spatial. How many of you see spatial within your organizational patterns? It's a possibility. Very good.
Oh,
Very good.
I'm sure it happens.
Oh, chronological.
Going the same way the whole time? Is that what you're talking about?
That would be chronological. So talking about that process, so lifespan, anything that will include that.
Oh, I never
Very
knew
good.
that.
Okay, so now that we've actually completed 2 of these, and some of you see how this actually fits into part of your projects, the next one is cause and effect. So if you have, which category would be most appropriate for cause and effect?
Concepts?
Conditions, issues,
People, places, things.
I said concepts.
concepts. Okay, let's come back here. Cause and effect. Conditions or issues. Okay, so we can look at this, and now we're gonna start merging these together. You may find yourself giving some kind of a historical timeline. Okay, so this happened, and this happened, and this happened, which was the
Yeah.
cause of this effect. Here now we're mixing and matching a couple of different types of organizational patterns. So, students, and I don't think anybody in this class is doing this, but global warming would be an example of, or climate change is an example of where that historical event, the chronological, and then the cause and effect is an example. Okay, how many of you are working with a condition or issue where you see cause and effect?
Potentially.
Okay, very good. We have almost 3/4 of you that are identifying from the start of class. So potentially, what about the concept? Are you seeing a concept in your cause and effect? Okay, good. All right, I think everybody is really identifying something. Okay, now moving forward, we're not gonna worry about problem solution because that's exclusively for your next projects. Pro-con could be a part of this. How many of you have a topic that could have bias, but you're working really hard to make sure that it's an informative presentation?
Oh, mine has a lot of bias.
Okay, so here you are. This is gonna be a good option for you. Now, pro-con is actually used very well when we're talking about rebuttals in persuasive presentations. And so if you've read ahead in that chapter, which I don't expect any of you to, you'll see that come up. But pro-con
We're supposed to do
is something
reading.
that's very good if you need to balance out in that neutral tone. So if you're coming in and you have this topic that others have opinions on, or you have a strong opinion on, you have to make sure that you balance that out with the pro and a con. Because our job is to enhance our audience's knowledge about something with informative. It isn't to change our minds, it isn't to persuade us. You can bring us up to that point, and we can't be thinking to ourselves, oh my gosh, I have an opinion about this. But it isn't your job to push us to that opinion. Your job is to present those both sides. So right now, unfortunately, I was hoping that we wouldn't have, well, we have to have class, but they have an informational session about the impeachment process. Right now, like my colleagues are doing it right now. And so I was like, oh, how much I would want to go to that just to see a balanced point of view, not to go and see CNN or Fox and have them over there fighting over this whole thing.
Let's just go over there and watch it then.
Well, we have to get through this. I know, I want to so bad, but I
We could use it as a field trip.
I couldn't use it as a legitimate reason with the snow day and everything, so we just have to be in class.
Dang
But
it.
that's an example of two of my colleagues that are giving an informational, now they may have bias, and that's okay, but that's not what I'm there to hear. You know, I would want to be there to hear just what is going on. Give me just the information. What can I expect? What is right? What's the right information? So that's where we're looking at with this pro-con. So anybody else see themselves using pro-con? Very good. More of those hands are going up. I like this. Okay, and then the very last one is just topical, and that's when we're mixing and matching our organizational patterns in order to suit the needs of our purpose of delivering an effective message. Okay. Does that help? Okay.
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay, we're ready for the next stage. Yes?
Wait, what was spatial again?
Spatial is when you describe something as it occurs in space. So, and you start with one direction. So for example, you go to a doctor's office and let's say an optometrist, and they have the eyeball, a model of the eyeball, and it's in layers from the inside to the out. So describing that from the inside to the out would be spatial. Okay, an anatomy class. Who's had anatomy? Okay.
Good job, Colton.
All right. There used to be a nursery song about one bone connecting to that other bone. Does everybody
Oh, I haven't heard that in a minute.
Yeah.
So I was thrilled when I brought that up, and like some of my students recognize that because that means that they've been using that song for a really long time. So that's an example of describing anatomy in a spatial way. Okay, now that we have gone over organizational patterns, you ready for the next major stage of organizing our information?
Let's go.
So I'm going to give you some paperwork. We're going to go over specific purpose.
Oh, no, yeah,
I'm going to let you break down your information in a way that makes sense. So much for doing this.
No problem, anytime.
You should take directing.
Make sure you give yourself a shout out at the end, Logan.
Yeah, go ahead and say hi to the camera.
Yeah, you gotta turn it around and say what's
All
up.
right. What up, guys? Wait, can I just do this? No, I can't.
Okay, the very next stage of this process is creating a specific purpose statement. Then we're going to really be ready to organize a few things.
Yes.
So to begin, I talked about this thing called a general purpose a couple of class periods ago. Who remembers what a general purpose is?
The message?
One more time.
The message? Or the thing you're trying to it's the purpose.
With your audience.
Mhm.
So it's the relationship with your audience. So a general
Good
purpose
job.
identifies that. That's why when I was talking about that forum that's happening right now about the impeachment process, they said it's strictly informative. I said, that's what I want to hear about. I don't want to hear about anybody persuading me about anything about this topic. I want to know what's going on.
That's what's up.
So that's what they promise their relationship is with us. So informative are one of the three types of the general purposes we talked about. What were the other ones? Very good. Okay, now that we have this relationship with the audience identified, a specific purpose is your objective. Objective and specific purpose are interchangeably used in the world. For some reason, speech classes like to use specific purpose. It's one sentence that says, what's your objective here? It's audience censored. 3 specific things are required in a specific purpose. 1 is the general purpose. Next, this is the audience-centered part. So your target audience has to be a part of this. And then the last thing, the thing that you've been working on these last few class periods, you've been doing research on it, you've been narrowing it down, is what?
Your topic?
That's it. It's your topic. It's the
that
thing.
simple.
It's your goal.
It's crazy. Never would have guessed.
And you can write it in a couple of different ways. The easiest way to write a specific purpose statement is to start by saying, I'm going to
Inform
who? About.
my topic.
That's it.
That's-
as easy as it is.
That's a really simple thesis. I like it.
It's not a thesis.
What would
It's
it?
a specific purpose.
Oh, okay.
But we're almost to the thesis. The thesis is a lot harder.
Oh, okay.
So we're sticking with the simple stuff right now.
Ah, I see.
But this statement is worth about 10% of your entire outline, and it's really
Bro,
not any
what?
more difficult than that. Okay, now, you have to make sure that this is very narrowed down. So big mistakes I see are students having 2 different goals, 2 different topics. Has to be one thing. The other thing is sometimes students don't really like how boring this sounds. And so they want to say things like, I'm going to educate my peers or the participants about this thing. And that's okay. I don't care if you do that.
Yes.
And then if you want to get really fancy, you can have what's called a behavioral objective, which is what your book talks about. And the behavioral objective is what you want your audience to be able to do by the end of this. So it should be a tangible goal. By the end of my informative presentation, my participants will be able to list the stages of elderly depression.
Oh no.
So, a very tangible goal. You don't have to do that, but that's how you do that. I'd like you to each write a specific purpose statement on the sheets that I have in front of you, give you a couple of minutes, and to share that with your peers, and we'll check back with each other. We can go ahead and stop it for now.
Oh, okay.
And then,
Sweet.